Today is Wednesday, May 29th in 2024, and we welcome you to our Chapter 49 podcast. Uh, our personal schedules, unfortunately, prevented us from recording a podcast last week, but we are back now for another episode. And just so you know, in case you're new to this podcast, Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana. My name is Larry Lannon. I'm a retiree, a communications volunteer for Chapter 49. And we welcome once again our chapter president, Duncan Giles.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
And I should say that we are here in central Indiana are having a cold spell. It was like 40 some degrees, or this morning was 50 degrees. It was very cold for a late May day, but we've had strange weather all across the country. We've had all sorts of strange things. Some weather forecaster on TV said we are in Indiana, at least in this part of Indiana, getting a blast of cold Arctic air. You don't hear that in May very often, but
No, you don't. It's one of the things I like to say about Indiana weather. You don't like it, wait 15 minutes, it'll change.
yeah, we were lucky to get the Indianapolis 500 in after a rain delay.
Yep.
In fact, they had to have a curfew 8:15 because it would be too dark to run the race. And actually, those drivers had a heck of a time. They had never ever driven those cars at that hour of the day. They didn't even practice driving those cars in that hour of the day. So the cars were not set up to run like at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. And the drivers had never seen the lighting the way it was. And there
Yeah.
are no
And I
lights at the speedway.
yeah, and I think the biggest problem would have been if it ran much past 8:15 and started getting dark, getting out 300,000 of our closest friends who had had an extra 4 hours to enjoy themselves to drive out of the track.
Yeah, I heard normally, it's not easy to get out of the track, but it was particularly difficult this year. So hats off to the people who had to manage that traffic, but there were lots of people stuck in it. But we're going to move on to our subjects for this podcast. And we do have a number of very interesting subjects to talk about, some that have just come up right before we record this podcast on May 29th. The first one has to do with telework. Now, we know all this griping in Congress about how people in Congress don't think we're working when we're working at home, which we think is absolutely wrong. We do believe we're working and working hard at home and showing the results of that with the data if you actually want to look at it. But something has been added now because there was a management directive that came out as to what managers should do in looking to remove employees from telework. And NTEU has not wasted any time in acting on this. So I'd like to get the kind of rundown on the background of this and what our national union is doing to try to fight this new management directive on taking people off of telework.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on the key phrase there, Larry. And basically, what's happened is, the rules on removing somebody from telework are set out in Article 50. That these have been negotiated. We discussed them at length during the term bargaining. They were talked about again at midterm bargaining. So, they're very set. And then all of a sudden, management comes up with a list of things you could get removed from telework for, and one of them is not following a management directive. Well, I understand where management's coming from. Unfortunately for them, they have not requested that be changed in the agreement. And so to basically do that type of thing, when you're wanting to change something that is more than what we call in our profession a de minimis change, it's basically there has to be, some actual effect of this, what negative effect for us of what's going to happen. And when you sit there and talk about something that's going to make it easier for management to take employees off of telework, that's definitely more than a de minimis change. That's something that could be actionable. So because that was not negotiated, it wasn't discussed with National NTEU, we filed a national grievance on this to basically say, hey, look, you need to stop this. You need to go back. You need to roll it back and go back to, what the rules were before you decided to change this up.
Interesting is that recently there's been midterm bargaining and the management never brought this up.
Yeah, you can only open up certain articles and, discuss certain things at midterm bargaining. And it never fails to amaze me that some people in management, when they in the human capital office roll this kind of thing out, it's like, wait, did nobody think to vet this with anybody? Or what's worse to me is like, NTEU won't find out. Let's just see if we can slide it in. That type of thing really irritates myself, my fellow chapter presidents across the country, and fellow leaders, as well as absolutely infuriates, I can tell you, NTEU national office when something that feels like something is trying to be slid past us, and that's what it feels like. So, we're NTEU national wasted no time in jumping on this, requesting a briefing, because we want to make sure that employees are treated correctly, fairly, and if they desire to telework and they are teleworking and they want to continue to telework, that there shouldn't be impediments that aren't in the agreement to that.
The other part of this is interesting because this was a directive from the management chain of command, not something normally shared with NTEU. Does make one wonder how NTEU discovered this.
Well, there are a lot of right-thinking management officials out there and executives. I deal with a lot of them on a daily basis. And there are many times, as I like to say, things are thrown over the transom to me, shared with me or others, if management thinks that things are not being done correctly. And, we're in effect, okay, I'm giving this to you to fix this. We can't fix it. We'd get in trouble. Can you guys fix it? And so myself or, my brethren across the country have no problem in sending this up to national, letting them know when we see something like this so they can deal with it effectively, either by contacting IRS and saying, hey, what's going on with this? Or something like this saying, hey, look, this is wrong. It's incorrect. You shouldn't be doing this. We're filing on this to get it fixed.
And just to drill down a little bit, in this management directive, be a little more specific as to what, at least to the extent that NTEU knows this, as to who might be impacted by this, who would be taken off of telework, who otherwise would not be.
Potentially anyone could be taken off of telework. That's the dangerous. It's very nebulous in exactly what needs to be done in order to have violated your telework agreement. And that's something that we work very hard at in getting the wording right in the agreement. When people see the agreement, they're going, okay, they've thrown some things together, to make sure that everybody is treated equally. I can tell you for a fact that every sentence in these agreements is looked at and done very carefully. Every sentence. And so when you have something that's added on like that, it's almost like you have an equilibrium, and that floors the equilibrium right there. There's a problem, there's an issue. So when something is thrown in like that, you can't have it without a prior discussion. And that's what we have here.
All right. So hopefully nobody has been taken off telework as a result of this. If anybody has, immediately talk to your local chapter. And we're watching this very carefully. Chapter 49, and we do have our Facebook page. You can search for it under NTEU Chapter 49 Indiana. We did place this on our Facebook page just as soon as Duncan informed us about this. So we will watch it carefully, update it there, and update you on this podcast as well. And of course, we had another grievance just filed today, the day we record this on May 29th. This called the behavior grievance. So fill us in. What's this all about?
Yeah, this is kind of strange as well. IT is apparently put some wording in for when you're going to things like bears, uh, things of that nature, when you're going to use one of the systems. They want you to make sure that you know that you're not supposed to misuse it. Don't do anything with it you're not supposed to. Don't, if it's something like IDRS, don't look up something you're not, you shouldn't be. It's almost like Dean Wormer placing it on double secret probation from Animal House. It's like everybody already understands these rules. They're very clear in the code of conduct. Why, all of a sudden unilaterally IT felt the need to include this, we're not sure. So again, this is one of those situations where, why is this happening? What happens if an employee responds negatively to this because they don't like the way maybe this is phrased? Are they going to be denied the ability to get into certain systems that they should be entitled to? So because of the fact that, again, it wasn't discussed with National NTEU, we feel that it is more than de minimis, and I'm sure everybody listening is very happy they're getting a lesson in what de minimis is or isn't. We feel that there is a potential for harm to employees, which is why we feel it's more than a de minimis change. So we filed a grievance on this to try and get this taken out. If they want to do something like this, they need to brief National NTEU. That needs to be, we need to take a look at it. And if we have questions or issues, we may need to propose impact and implementation negotiations over this. It just depends. But when it happens as a surprise and is unilaterally done by a business unit, in this case IT, then yeah, absolutely, National NTEU is going to have an issue with it.
Well, first of all, just to kind of talk about de minimis for a while, for those of us, those of you who are listening or watching this podcast and are involved in tax law, de minimis is a term we use in tax law as well. Now, de minimis is a form of legal Latin, which, if strictly if you look at the strict translation of it from Latin, it's a legal Latin term that basically says something is so small you cannot even measure it. That's the meaning legally and strictly of the legal Latin that is de minimis. So I don't know, Duncan, it seems like management sometimes gets into a mode where everything is de minimis.
We do seem to run in those type of cycles, Larry. It gets to be kind of confusing when they do this, because yeah, it's like, oh no, this is de minimis, that's de minimis. One time I told somebody from labor relations that I would feel free to jump on them with all my weight and tell me if that's going to be a de minimis change to your body or not. And they said it probably wouldn't be more than de minimis. And I said, and so is this change. There we go.
Yeah, I think de minimis is supposed to have a meaning in the legal sense of so very tiny, and so we at NTEU have to fight this all the time when the management claims a change is de minimis. So again, this just to kind of backtrack and not backtrack, but to review this. This is a statement that employees are required to sign to get on these systems they need to use in order to do their work, correct?
Absolutely correct. And it's a change. This is something that hasn't happened previously, and was not discussed with National NTU as it should have been. So therefore, the national grievance was filed to go back to where it was before.
And again, that's another grievance we're going to keep an eye on, and at our same Facebook page and on this podcast, we will keep you up to date on this. Another issue that is of interest, I think, to people who have any interest in how NTEU is run, as we mentioned, Doreen Greenwald is our national president. She's the leader of our union, but the number two person in that organization is the executive vice president. There was a recent round of electioneering, if you will, chapters voting on who will be the new executive vice president, since one last elected by convention chose to resign. As a result of that, there were what often happens, people take exception, they file paperwork to say that perhaps the election wasn't run the way it should have been run, and doesn't, sometimes it doesn't take much to do one small thing incorrectly and run an election again. So as I understand it, the first round of the election, which we had thought was over, after a legal review by outside legal sources, that it appears NTEU was going to start from not totally scratch, but from the nominated candidates, and once again do the first round of balloting. So explain this as easily as you can to people who are members of the union and might not understand all the inside baseball here.
I think you explained it pretty well. I don't want to go into a detailed explanation over something that's going over the IRS email system, but suffice to say that the detailed information will be on our Facebook page later. But it's just one of those things where erring on the side of caution, wanting to make sure that things are done right, whether it's a local election, a local chapter election, or a national one. And NTU wants to try and do the right thing at all times. And, doing this election in this way is part of that.
All right. Again, we'll keep you posted, as Duncan said, on Facebook and on this podcast, just to let you know what's going on. We're not trying to talk about internal union business, but it is news, as the fact that there will be an election run again. And we just wanted everyone to know that. Let's look once again at the survey. We've talked about this on several podcasts, the FEVS survey underway. And I know you have a comment or two to make on that.
Yeah, this is one of those things where folks are getting reminders. Time's running out. Please take the survey. And for those of us who are seasoned, who have been around a long time, and I know what the seasoned folks are thinking. I've taken this before. Nothing has changed. It's not looked at. Why the heck do I care? You know, it's one of those things where if you don't express your opinion, nothing is going to change. Will you see immediate, clear changes when you express your opinion on the FEVS? Very possibly not. Is every answer looked at? I can tell you right now, I've been on several teams, and I know executives who deal with this, and I can tell you for a fact it is. And that's the way that we try and make improvements. Now, is everything going to be the way that we would like it to be because we put down certain answers on the FEVs? No, unfortunately, it's not. But this gives a clear indication to the commissioner on down of where the issues are, where things are going well, where things are not going well. And we need to get everybody as much as possible on board to do this. And as I like to say, to be very, very honest when you're doing this. If you feel something's going well, let them know that. If you think something is not going well, do not be afraid of retaliation. This is not something that is happening for that. This is looking at big picture. We need those numbers. If something is not working well, we need the numbers of employees that are saying that to make sure that management gets that message very clearly.
So FEVS survey, it's currently underway. So you're encouraging people not just to take the survey, but be very straightforward and honest in your answers. So moving on to another issue, we've been hearing all this talk about telework. I've already alluded to that. There are people in the Congress and elsewhere who think that telework is like taking a vacation, like, oh, we can work at home. We don't really have to work. Not true based on all the measurements we have. And having been a former manager, I know it's easy to monitor employees when they're working outside of the regular office, be it at their home or a third party location. So with all this talk going on, I think it's very encouraging, Duncan. By the way, the director of Office of Personnel Management, OPM, which is the HR office for the entire civilian federal government, she has decided to leave. Now, most people don't stay in that job long. She stayed there about 3 years, and that was actually pretty good. The OPM acting director, who's filling into that job until there's someone else confirmed by the Senate, came out very heavily in favor of telework. And I do think that sends a message. What's your take on that?
Yeah, very much so. It's one of those things where, you and I have talked about this a lot, and I've talked about it with a lot of employees, either in my office, on the phone, in Teams meetings, via email. They get pretty upset when they hear things from Congress or other people saying, well, you're not at work in person, so therefore you're not doing anything, which is such a crock of malarkey, let's say. Not the word I wanted to use, but we'll go with that one. But it's just totally unfair to the federal employees, who have shown, and other studies have shown for those in the private sector, that you are more productive if you are working from home. You have, less stress. You have less distractions. It's clearly shown that less sick leave is taken, less FMLA is taken, family medical leave is taken. That that you're productive. That most people actually work more than they usually would if they were in an office. But because of the fact that there are those in Congress and elsewhere that see empty buildings and are getting contacts from their constituents about restaurants are not being filled up. You're not seeing people in office buildings, so therefore space is being reduced, things of that nature, that telework is bad. I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to put that genie back in the bottle. If you have, and I've said this before and I will continue to say this, and I've said this to executives on down, if you've got an employee that's not working from home, well, I bet my bottom dollar that they weren't working or will not be working well from the office. A good employee is going to do the work that they need to do, regardless of where they're at. And if you let them work from home, again, I'll bet my bottom dollar that they're going to be more productive than they would be if they have to drive into the office, find a parking spot, come into the office through, whatever they need to do through security or whatever, be there, go out for lunch instead of being home for lunch, worrying about, family, friends, things of that nature, when, they can actually just look over, not childcare, but just look over and make sure that everybody's doing what they need to be doing at home if they're working from there. So, are there jobs that require face-to-face contact? Absolutely. And those are being done. But for those that don't require constant face-to-face contact, beating people up for the idea of telework is just nonsensical to me. It doesn't help in retention. It certainly doesn't help in recruiting. And it's just a bad idea.
Well, Duncan, I have the experience of actually helping to roll out the first, what we called then a Flexi Place program, when we didn't have the technology to connect from all. It was mostly used by revenue officers, revenue agents, a few other field people who were out in the field anyway. And even then, Duncan, because again, we didn't have the technology we have today in the mid 90s, encouraged people to work at home all the time. We're willing to give them furniture and equipment. Now, of course, the furniture and equipment were junk, and that's why people stopped doing it. They gave the worst cast-off desks and other.
Yeah.
So when that was clear, people stopped doing it, and the idea was to try to lower the amount of rental space needed. That was even true in the mid 90s. As you said before, Duncan, the government is on this program to reduce office space. Yet on the other hand, they're getting this pressure from certain people in Congress and others to cut back on telework. You cannot do both at the same time.
That's very succinctly put. It's just nuts to me. And I love the thing. Well, we're going to make these hoteling desks. This person can come in, one, and when it's assigned, it's really fun. This person can come in on Monday. This person can come in on Tuesday. This person can come in on Wednesday. What happens if their schedule changed and, you've got this desk assigned to 3 people and 2 of them have to show up on the same day? Well, they're going to have to find another desk. Well, what if you assigned that desk to another 3 people and they're using it? So, there are issues there as well. Hoteling does help that. But again, you know, it doesn't, there is nothing that shows that bringing folks back to the office when they don't have the need to meet with people face to face is productive. Every study that we've seen, every reputable study that we've seen that's out there states that, you know, people are more productive when they're able to telework than when they're not. And that's the bottom line.
So again, it was encouraging to see our acting director of OPM back telework. And the private sector tried to get people to come back in the office, and they did not have much success with it.
Yeah,
What they
that hasn't
found,
gone well with a lot of companies.
especially at technology companies, where you can go to another job, another company will be glad to take you, and they'll let you work at home. I'm afraid the government, the federal government, may be putting itself in that position if there's an effort to cut back on telework just because there's pressure with no data to back it up. Okay, Duncan, time for your final comment.
My final comment, I'm going to do twofold. First off, you know, as I said earlier, we had 300,000 of our closest friends here. I'm going to, you know, make a plug for Indianapolis. It's just a great city to come to for those of you who've never been here. Um, you know, we have a wonderful array of things to do, and the 500 is an event not to be missed. The bigger picture for this, though, is the holiday it's around, Memorial Day. And, you know, I am just my deepest thanks and sympathies to the families and extended families of those who have fallen in defense of our country and in defense of other people's freedoms. And I am, you know, very grateful, saddened by the loss, but grateful for the sacrifice that they've made. And, you know, and I hope that their families can take some solace from that.
Yes, and the Speedway has a very long history of honoring Memorial Day. It was a Memorial Day event for many years until the federal government switched it to a Monday holiday when no, it's on Memorial Day weekend, the schedule for the Sunday before. So, and if you watch the race, the pre-race activities, there's a very heavy um, accent emphasis put on military and Memorial Day and remembering all that. So, and by the way, just as far as Indianapolis goes, people need to know that the Speedway Museum, which has always been a draw, is going under a renovation by next year sometime. It's going to be a whole new and enhanced experience for that Speedway Museum, which I think will be something people, even if the race is not going on, if you want to go tour the racetrack, you could take a trip around it in a bus, and soon next year, sometime next year, they're hoping it'll be done by next year's race. May not be, but that's an experience. I went to the old museum; it was a thrill, and the new
Mhm.
enhanced one that the Penske Entertainment is putting together, I'm sure will be an even better experience. My final comment has to do with an announcement that was made officially by Major League Baseball on the day we record this, May 29th, although it was leaked out the day before. Major League Baseball is now going to incorporate all the statistics of the Negro League into its historical statistics, which means Ty Cobb will no longer have the best uh, career batting average. Duncan, somebody else is going to have that. Who is that?
That'd be Josh Gibson,
That's
who
right.
is one of those great players that if you've never heard of him and you're a baseball fan, you should look him up because the man was an absolute wonderful player. People like Babe Ruth were in awe of him.
Yeah, and I think we should. How should I put this? I'm a lifelong baseball fan, and I know there are a lot of traditionalists out there who will not like this. But here's what I would say to them. Read some real baseball history. Some wonderful books have been written about the history of baseball. And if you go back into that, if you say, well, the Negro Leagues were not on the same par as the major leagues, well, we'll never know for sure. But I'll tell you this, during the off season, there were barnstorming leagues, and there's not a lot of good record keeping on those. But the major league players played games against these Negro League players, and they played them toe to toe. So to say that the Negro Leagues were inferior, I am not absolutely sure of that. I mean, you can make your case for that. I don't think the difference was as big as you want to think. And it's a sad footnote to our history that there had to be a Negro leagues in the United States because Major League Baseball did not allow black players for a very long time. It was sadly a reflection of our racist society, and it's a sad commentary that it was the late 1940s before there was one African American player, and that was because we had one very brave man named Branch Rickey who was willing to go out on a line at that time and took a risk. And of course, we know the history from there. Thank you, Duncan Giles, for joining us on this Chapter 49 podcast. We had a week off. We're sorry about that. We'll try to keep it a weekly podcast as much as possible. But Duncan and I do have busy schedules. Even though I'm retired, I stay busier than maybe I should be. But Duncan, of course, has a job to do as chapter president. So we try to work amongst all that. But we are very happy you chose to join us using your valuable time to watch or listen to our podcast. In the meantime, please be safe and be kind.